Okay, hello everyone. I think I've got my PowerPoint sorted out now. Thanks for joining I think I've got my PowerPoint sorted out now. Thanks for joining us today. We will get right into our planned activities for the day. We're going to be talking today about how to succeed in law school. This is not intended to be a discussion of whether you should go to law school, whether it's the right fit for you, what you should do in law school, but more kind of a general discussion of how are you going to be successful. And we're primarily aimed at people who are planning to go to law school this fall. But if that's not you, if it's another year off or so, please feel free to stay tuned. One thing before we get started with the substance today, we are going to be recording this. A lot of people end up watching it after the fact. So your continued presence here is consent to the recording. If you don't consent, we'll catch you next time. I want to thank Mr. Nick Schenk, the head of undergraduate advising for the School of Politics, Security, and International Affairs, for setting up this event and handling the logistics today. I also want to welcome our guest panelists. It appears that one of them has not been able to join us, but the other two are here. And so we'll welcome them now. They are UCF graduates who are in law school now, both second year law students. So they've got some good experience to share, both because they've been through a COVID year of law school and through a more normal year of law school, and also because they have the ability now to compare their second year of law school to the first year of law school, which may provide some insight for you as you're thinking about getting ready for your first year of law school. So we have Brandt Dietry, who is a 2L at Harvard Law School. Rachel has not been able to join us yet, and Michael McWaters is a 2L at Washington University in St. Louis. Brandt and Michael, if I can ask you to just very briefly tell us maybe what you majored in at UCF and what your employment plans are either for this summer or for after, or both for after law school as well, as by way of introduction, and then we'll get into the substance of what we're talking about. So Michael, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. So I graduated from UCF in 2020. I didn't graduated virtually, rather, as maybe some of you experienced. I majored in political science and in economics. Now I'm at WashU, and I'll be working this summer and hopefully once I graduate law school at Jones Day, which is a law firm in Atlanta.
And a very prestigious one. Michael's not sharing with you, but that's an amazing job to get. Brandt?
Yeah, hi guys, I'm Brandt Dietry. I graduated at UCF a year ahead of Michael. I was 2019. And so I've finally been gone long enough that when I log into a call like this, I don't recognize any of the names that come up. So just Professor Merriam and Michael. Yeah, graduated in 2019, major in economics and a minor in legal studies. I worked for a year as a healthcare consultant in Wisconsin before coming to law school. And yeah, I'm a 2L here. So I've been living here for 2 years now.
And what do you think might be in your future, Brandt?
I'm heading this summer to a firm called Wilkie Farr and Gallagher in their Chicago office, which just opened, and I'll probably be doing that after law school as well.
And for those of you who are not aware, that's another very, very prestigious law firm. So both Michael and Brandt have landed highly sought after and coveted jobs. So congratulations to both of you. Okay, as I mentioned, today our session is about how to succeed in law school, and not whether you should go to law school or which law school you should go to. Those are things I'm happy to chat with you as a pre-law advisor if you want to at some point. We're really focused on how to make the best of our law school experience and be successful. And these are the various topics that we're going to walk through today. I'll be making some comments about each topic from my perspective, and then I'll ask the panelists to weigh in with their thoughts, which may be completely different than mine. Their law school experience is far more recent and therefore more relevant than mine. But I'm kind of coming at this from, rather than as a law student perspective, from a professor perspective. At the end of the presentation, we'll give you the opportunity to ask whatever questions you have of our panelists. So if you've done your homework in thinking about law school and going this fall, some of these things are things I'm sure you've already heard of, thought about, been made aware of in some way or another. But hopefully the ability to actually hear directly from live law students, ask questions for those of you who are attending live and not watching later on Zoom or on a recording, hopefully they'll be able to get a better flavor for what the experience that you're about to enter is all about. So this first bullet that I'm talking about is the law school versus undergrad. We'll be asking the panelists in a moment to share their views on the differences between law school and undergrad. But in my view, law school is not simply a harder undergrad, right? And some people think of it as like, oh, I know it's going to be harder, but they have this frame, because it's all your experience is at this point in higher education, that it's just going to be undergrad plus. In my view, it's actually a very, very different experiences. Some of those differences would be, I think, intuitive. You'd expect workload is going to be different, except for those of you who are majoring in 7 different things at once and trying to finish in 2.5 years. Especially the reading load, the preparation for each class, the number of hours required to just be ready for a class is going to significantly increase. Those of you who've had Dr. Lanier or me for a con law class or another law class might think you've done a lot of reading in our classes, but you haven't seen anything yet. So I'll start off with the first question. Brandt, we'll go to you. When you do it right, understanding that we all have other priorities from time to time, how many hours of reading do you have typically, and particularly if you could think back to your 1L year, to prepare for one class period? In other words, how many hours would you spend getting ready for that one class, do you think?
So 1L year, I'd say it was at least an hour per class period. And then you have 10, 12 class periods in a week. And sometimes up to 2. I know my property class was especially heavy. It really depends on the professor. I'm thinking like most of my classes ended up being around 1,200 pages total of reading throughout the semester. So I guess if you divide that up, 5 classes, 1,200 each, divided up through 12 weeks, it's a lot.
And what are you reading in those 1,200 pages?
Generally cases. 1L, very case heavy. So you're going to be reading a lot of dense cases, and the speed at which you can read it is dependent on a lot of things. I think a lot of times it's the length of a case. I think you can absorb 5 really short cases more easily than you can one case that is the size of all 5 combined, because you have to follow sort of threads of logic throughout a longer period. And then another factor is how old the cases are. So if a case is from the early 1800s and it's written in some, wild prose that we don't use a whole lot anymore, you got to be like looking up words in the middle of it, right? So it's a little bit different for that as well.
Yeah, I tell folks that the very first word I read for the very first homework assignment that I had in law school before class ever started, which, by the way, when you're headed to law school, you're going to be getting homework before you go to your first class. Like, they get started. It's not, let's look at the syllabus day. It is get started. The very first word of the very first case, I didn't know what it was. Never seen it before in my life. The word was assumpsit. It was from a famous contracts case book from Harvard, actually. And I was like, oh boy, I've made a terrible mistake. I can't even read the first word. Brandt, to follow up quickly, not necessarily in terms of workload, but have you found that the amount of time you have to spend reading gets better after 1L year, or after the first semester, or after the first few weeks of the first semester, or has it taken you roughly the same amount of time to read the same number of pages all along?
So within 1L year, you get a lot better over the first couple of weeks. Like the first few cases you read, you're still kind of figuring out how you need to think about taking notes for a reading, and how you're going to highlight and what your strategy is going to be for, writing in the margins and annotating your readings and stuff. And you kind of figure that out and settle into a groove. So that improves the time as well. And then moving from 1L year to 2L year, depending on what you take, so the world opens up 2L year of law school, right? 1L year is all prescribed for you. And then 2L, you can kind of do whatever you want to do. And so you can take a lot of black letter law classes that will resemble your first year classes, and there will be, lots of cases to read and lots of cold calling in class and stuff like that. And then you can do other cool stuff too. You can take research seminars, which I've had a great time with here. I cross-listed in a Harvard Business School class this semester, which was terrific. There's very little reading over there. Those guys don't do any work. So that's more just like reading a short case and coming ready to, have ideas and discuss things. So you get a lot more options your 2L year, and the reading time, at least for me, went down significantly between 1L and 2L. But yeah, first year, it kind of hits you like a load of bricks.
And I should say for everyone watching, both Brandt and Michael were very successful moot court competitors in undergrad. So they actually had experience reading cases, full length cases, and digesting them before they arrived at law school. So when Brandt says it takes, a few weeks to get kind of up to speed, it may take you longer. Don't be discouraged if it takes you an entire, I'll tell you from my perspective, it took me a semester before I felt like I was really good at reading cases in terms of being able to quickly find what was going to be important, identify the stuff that wasn't really going to be that meaningful, and be able to follow the thread of logic through it all. And on that point, the case books in law school have much longer case cuts than the cases you maybe have read in undergrad. So for example, if you've had a con law class with me, I might have you read a 5 to 10 page excerpt of the case. When in law school, that case might be a 50 page excerpt of the case. And we know now these days with the Supreme Court writing so many different opinions in multiple, particularly controversial cases, it can be even longer than that. Another thing that's significantly different between law school and undergrad is just that the things that worked in undergrad may not work in law school. And here's some things, examples of things that might not work for you in law school, even though they might have worked in undergrad. Cramming for exams. In other words, if you start thinking about, I've got an exam the night before the exam, you're going to be in big trouble. And we're going to talk about how outlines relate to that in a moment when we get into some details about how to be academically successful. But that's one thing. Attending class and assuming that's all you have to do to be ready for an exam, probably not going to work. Might have worked in undergrad, depending on the professor, depending on the way the courses were at, the questions were asked, so forth, probably not going to work. And the flip of that also probably not going to work, which is doing the reading but not attending class. You're probably also not going to be successful. So, you know, a lot of undergrads take one of those two approaches, depending on the class. Probably not going to work in law school. Another big thing, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a moment too, is expecting the professor to tell you what you need to know for the exam. This is a common complaint of law students, and we'll talk to Michael and Brandt in just a second about what their experience has been like. But professors often intentionally, perhaps not always, hide the ball in the sense of they want you to be exposed to all the different ideas. They want you to have to work through what all those different ideas add up to. In other words, they're not going to say the summary. So this is what everything means, right? At the end of the semester, you're not going to get the, here's what you need to know for the exam tomorrow kind of summary. It's more of a, here are all the amazing different concepts that we've discussed. Good luck on the exam. And so I think kind of figuring things out as you go along is going to be a little bit more necessary than assuming that professors just kind of give you a PowerPoint presentation or just give you a nice summary at the end of class every day of what you should have taken away from the cases. It's kind of up to you. There's often not extra credit available in law school. So if you've relied on extra credit for getting the grades that you were hoping for, it's probably not going to be available to you. Of course, you've probably all heard about the Socratic method, which is the idea that the professors are calling on students in class, engaging with students, perhaps engaging with you, walking you out on a logical limb until they can saw the limb off in front of all of your friends. Michael, let me ask you about that. As it relates to your experience in law school with the Socratic method, how did that differ than a typical class period in undergrad?
Sure. So, I mean, with law school, one of the big motivators to read is that you're going to get called on and you don't want to look stupid. That is, I mean, that's constantly something you're thinking about. It's not that bad, but that's absolutely something that occurs. And so generally professors will rotate through students throughout the semester, and the students in large part teach the class, or at least sort of help the professor and engage with the professor while they're teaching the course. And so it's very typical in essentially every class that you'll walk in, and when the professor gets started, they'll say, Michael, can you tell us the facts of this case? And then I will say a little bit about the facts, and the professor will say, and then what were the plaintiffs arguing there? Or how did the court address that argument? And they'll go through essentially the entire case with you and ask you questions both about the facts and about how the court applies the law. And there's really not much help involved. And if you get it wrong, they'll say something like, no. And that's really it. So yeah, you absolutely need to engage with the material ahead of time, not just to be familiar with it, but you really need to come close to mastering it, because essentially you're going to be asked to explain this concept before it's been reviewed in class. And so it's kind of like a test run where, okay, we're learning comparative negligence today. Let's see if Michael picked it up from the reading. If not, we're all going to find out. And so you definitely really need to be familiar with the cases ahead of time so you can defend yourself when you're called on.
Yeah, and that relates also to that, what I mentioned, with the professor's view in law school of like the pedagogical style is not I'm going to tell you everything you need to know. It really is. I'm going to help you learn how to figure out what you need to know on your own, because that's what you're going to do as a lawyer. You're not going to have some person tell you what the law is. You're going to have to go figure it out. And that's the skill that's being developed. Thanks for sharing that, Michael. Another difference might be that in many courses, we can talk about this a little bit with grading, but in many courses, one exam will determine your entire grade for the course. That means the pressure is really high on your performance on that exam. And so we'll talk in a moment about how to get ready for that. What do we do differently perhaps in law school than we do as an undergrad in terms of getting ready? Brandt already alluded to another difference, which is that typically in your first year of law school, you have no choice as to what classes you're taking. Some schools give you a choice in your second semester, in the spring semester, for maybe one course, maybe two courses. But often you're just told these are the courses you're taking. These are going to be your professors. It doesn't matter if you've heard this is the worst professor of all time. I was just, as Michael was saying, that sometimes when you get the wrong answer in law school, the professor will say, no, I was reminded of a famous movie, which hopefully some of you have seen, but aren't too intimidated by, that's set at Brandt Law School, The Paper Chase. The answer was a lot more harsh than no. There's often the implicit, and you're an idiot, Merriam. At least there was when I was answering or attempting to answer questions in law school. Also in law school, there is often a very strict grading curve. I'll ask you both quickly if there's a grading curve at Harvard and at Wash U right now that affects what your grade possibilities are. Brandt, if you want to go first.
Sure. Michael loves to make fun of me because he likes to say I don't have real grades here at Harvard, and he's half right. So Harvard works on a hard curve system, but they sort of dampen the lower end of it. And so our grading system here, you take a class and it's all percentiles. And so if you finish in the bottom 10% of a particular class, you get what's called a low pass grade. In theory, you can get an F, you can get a fail, but I've never heard of anybody doing that. You'd have to just not show up to the exam probably to get one of those. You get a low pass, which is kind of like a little bit of a black eye on your transcript. Maybe it's hey, this person didn't do very well in this class, and that's a heads up to employers. And then so from the 10th percentile to the 70th percentile here is just a pass. And so they put a P on your transcript, and then anyone looking at your transcript has no idea if you were barely scraping by as the 11th percentile person, or if you were the 70th percentile doing above average really well. So and then the top 30% gets an H, which is an honors grade, and then the top maybe one person in the class can get what's called a Dean Scholar Prize. I have not gotten any of those in my time here. Those are hard to get. And so I think Harvard does that on purpose to sort of, they communicate to employers like, hey, they're not trying to differentiate sort of the middle of the class from each other. The grading system is designed to kind of pick out the top few performers in each class, and then everyone else kind of looks pretty similar to each other. And I know Michael's system's a lot different.
Michael, yeah, sure, I'll share how the other half lives. So we have traditional grades. I do agree with Brandt that I'm not aware of anyone who's ever failed. But the way it works at WashU is I think all classes have to be curved to like a 3.68 median, something like that. I'm not sure exactly. It's like a low A, high B is our mean. And so when the professor plugs in their grades at the end of the day, the average of all those grades needs to be that number. And what that means is that not everyone can get an A, and certainly not an A+, because it will exceed that average. And so the name of the game is that for someone to do better, someone else has to do worse. And the nature of that is that if you have a lot of great exams, you might have a tighter curve around that B+, A-. And then if there's some really exceptional exams and some not so great exams, then you'll have some people who get like A+ and some people who maybe get like a C is the lowest I've ever heard of. But the nature, because it has to be curved to that number, the grades are pretty constrained in the sense that first, not everyone can do great. And second, the grades are generally pretty tightly grouped around that average, which is somewhat, it's kind of a nice thing in that it's hard to do really bad, but it's also hard to do exceptionally well.
Great, thank you. So you can see right there are multiple ways that schools do it. And now we all want to go to Harvard and have their grading system. My grading system as an undergrad, in law school in prehistoric times was very much like Michael's. It was a B at the time. So almost everybody at my school got a B in a class. for every A, there was also somebody getting a C, and professors didn't really like doing that very much. So it was very hard to get an A, but the comfort of also difficult to get a C. I succeeded in getting one anyway. Let's move on to academic success ideas. My first suggestion to you, and people may roll your eyes, but is that you have to read. You have to be prepared for class every time, or you're not going to understand what's going on in that class. I would imagine most of the people in attendance today are smart, hardworking students, and so you're not surprised by the fact that I'm telling you you should read. But some of us might be, some of our attendees today might be so smart that you've been able to get by just with being smart. In law school, that really doesn't get it done because you don't know what's going on if you haven't done the reading. So my suggestion to you is read. If you're trying to think about what is the single most important thing you can do to be ready for doing well in law school, it's to actually keep up with the reading so that you really know what's going on when it's being discussed in class. And then you could be interacting with what's going on in class. Even if you're not actually speaking, your brain should be interacting and say, well, that's not what I thought, or I actually agreed more with the dissent in this case, and here's why. In the classes I've just personally that I didn't read as well for, I didn't do as well, both from a grade standpoint and just from a general understanding after the fact. I just didn't remember the information as well. So read. But the most common one you've probably already heard of if you're ready to go to law school this fall, but I want our panelists to talk about it a little bit, is outlines. And Michael, we'll start with you this time. What's an outline? Why is it important? How do you make one? If you tell us a little bit about outlines, that'd be great.
Sure. So an outline is really just a summary of everything you learned in the class. And they can vary quite a bit depending on what type of exam you have. So some people like a 5 to 10 page outline, which just has like the appropriate legal tests. So you might say like, oh, if I have this kind of, I don't know, First Amendment issue, here's the test I apply. If there's a sovereign immunity issue, this is what I should look at. And then some relevant cases. Other people like a 30 or 40 page outline with a lot more detail, but the function of it is the same. And it is, you take the exam generally with your outline, which is maybe something we haven't touched on, is that most of the exams are open book, open note. And so you can have your outline with you, and you need your outline with you because you're not going to read 300 pages again. You need to have the text right there with you and sort of go through that while you're taking the exam. And then related to that is when you are studying for exams, creating your own outline is kind of like the review process. And so what I do, I think is pretty common, is that you go through all your old notes, you go through the cases you read, and you try to compile and distill all that information down to like a 20-ish page document that summarizes everything. And then in the process of doing that, you have reviewed for the course, and then you have this document that you're very familiar with that you will sort of use as your guide while you're taking the exam.
Very good. Brandt, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's right. There's also this concept of attack outlines. So I know the way the way I preferred to study for exams was I'd make a giant outline with like all kinds of detail. And then especially if it was a shorter exam, like a 3 or 4 hour exam, I'd make a second document that was maybe just like 2 or 3 pages with just sort of like pointers to my big outline. Like if this kind of problem comes up, you need to talk about this case, this test. And so, and sort of trying to distill everything down to as compact a form as possible to just help with speed on the exams, because these things can turn into like typing contests sometimes. There are exam answers, like you'll read past exam answers when you're studying for an exam. It'll be a 3-hour exam and someone will have written like 30 pages worth of stuff. It's just like people will go crazy on these. And so speed becomes important in certain classes more than others. So that's something to keep an eye on as well.
Very helpful. I think both panelists mentioned things that are important to take away. Michael used the word distill. And I think for me, that's how I think about the outlines as well, is it's really kind of distilling. Okay, we just had a 1 to 2 hour reading, and we talked about this in class for an hour and 15 minutes. What was I supposed to take away from all of that, right? That's what the outline is. It's that distillation of what did the cases stand for? Why did they matter? What are the opposing views that you need to also be considering? I found, and I think others do as well, that process of distilling is the ultimate process of learning, right? How do these pieces fit together? What matters? What doesn't matter? that is really when the learning, the synthesis, the putting things together, distilling and synthesizing things, which means that if you borrow someone else's outline or you buy an outline, which there are plenty of commercially available outlines for all the courses. And in fact, they're so helpful or trying to be so helpful that they will even key the outline to your particular contract's textbook, right? So you can buy an outline that was designed with page numbers and everything for your textbook. Those can be helpful, but you're not doing the actual synthesis and distilling when you're just using somebody else's outline. Some professors won't let you use commercial outlines. I think that's less, it's more difficult to kind of police that these days. So I don't think that's as common. Brandt mentioned, both alluded to the idea that maybe you have a smaller document rather than just this giant thing. That's particularly helpful in the few closed book exams where you actually do kind of need to memorize your outline. My outlines used to be roughly 80 pages long. That was probably a normal outline for me. Obviously not memorizing those in the closed book exams. So my suggestion is that you start with outlines from the beginning. You start synthesizing from the beginning. In other words, after day one of the class, what did I learn today? What does this matter? I will tell you from my own personal experience, when I tried to create the outline in the week before the exam or the 2 weeks before the exam, it was terrible. I couldn't remember 3 months earlier, what we had talked about and what the nuances were in the case X. So I would recommend you just make yourself, kind of impose upon yourself the requirement that you're going to keep up with it, right? Maybe you don't do it that afternoon if you don't have time that afternoon about that class today, but it's going to be a lot easier to add your half a page of outline when it's the day of the class and you just did the reading last night and you had the class this morning, and now you're putting that information in your outline rather than trying to remember what you did a month ago. We're going to talk a little bit more about how to prepare for exams in a moment, panelists, so just be prepared for that. So let's shift to that now. We don't have time to fully cover how to write a great exam answer. That's not our intent here. And there will be opportunities for you while you're in law school. I highly encourage you, look for them, take advantage of them. If there's a seminar, after school, after class one day, some student government organization is putting it on, or maybe the faculty are putting it on in some schools. Maybe some bar prep course is coming in and trying to help you, sell their bar prep services by offering this service as well. Take advantage of as many opportunities as you can to have people talk about how to prepare for and how to write a good exam answer. So that's not our focus right now, but as we think about preparing for exams, Brandt alluded to something, which is he looked at old exam answers, saw a 30-page exam answer. A lot of professors, it's not true of every professor and it's not true at every school, but a lot of professors will make prior exams, the questions at least, available. And some additional professors will make, like, here was an A answer to a prior exam. They're not going to ask the same question, but you're going to get a flavor for, oh, this is why that was an A answer. This is what they covered. The 30-page answer suggests that what is true of most law professors, which is they're looking for completeness, right? You're better off including more so that you're identifying the issues and so forth. Panelists, let's say, we don't have to think hypothetically, you're about to hit exams, both of you. Let's say you've created the best outline of all time, right? So you've already done that. You've worked on it through the semester. You've got your outline nailed down. What's next? What's next in preparing for that exam? Are you ready when you have the outline, the best outline of all time done? Or what else do you do? Brandt, we'll start with you this time.
So as Professor Merriam mentioned, a lot of professors will make old exams available and old exam answers available. You don't want to be looking at an answer until you've tried the exam yourself, because that's where all the value comes. So doing practice exams is huge. So I'll take an old exam, I'll have my outline with me, and I will take however much time is prescribed for that exam. I'll take, if it's an 8-hour exam, I'll set aside 8 hours and I'll do it. That's not true. I don't set aside the whole 8 all the time. And then I'll usually try to do like one full practice exam at least for an exam, and then I'll try to outline a couple of other practice exams. So like just sort of create a rough sketch of how I would answer this if I was taking the full 8 hours. That's helpful. And then another helpful thing is to get together with other people that you know in the class and do the same practice exam and then get together and talk about it. So that's a big thing that we did here, especially my 1L year, because you sort of know all your section mates and you have sort of a group picked out of people that you like working with. And so you get together on Zoom or in your living room and you kind of talk about, okay, here was the first sort of issue in this issue spotter. What did everyone say for this? Oh, I didn't think of that one. Oh, that's a good one. Oh, I hear I wrote something that you guys didn't write. Let's sort of compare notes and see if that was appropriate to include. And so you can get a lot of value out of that. And like Professor Merriam said, completeness is maybe even more important than accuracy on a lot of these exam questions, right? Professors just going through and like marking off, giving you a point for every sort of issue that you hit. And so it's kind of an exercise in throwing everything you have against the wall and seeing what sticks. And so getting together with other people and making sure that you have every sort of tool and every sort of thought available to you that you can is important.
That's great. Michael, anything to add about what you do after you've got your outline before the exam?
Sure. I was just going to say a little bit, and Brandt kind of alluded to this about spotting issues. But like the way a law school exam works is generally like a hypothetical or like a fact pattern is presented to you, and your job is to analyze that fact pattern and essentially like identify the relevant legal issues and offer some prediction for how they will come out. And so with your outline, when you're taking these practice exams, that's kind of the harder part of the exam. Is you're looking at these practice exams and you're reading through them and trying to figure out like, oh, could someone bring a claim for negligence here? I don't know. And then like Brandt said, you're chatting with your friends and they said, oh, I thought there was a strict liability claim there. You say, oh, I didn't see that. And that's really what the core of the exam is that you're reading through this fact pattern. And I mean, that's really the case for, I think every single class I've taken has had the bulk of the exam has been, John sues this person, he hit her with their car, and then this happens afterward. And you have to analyze this pattern of facts and try to figure out where the issues are. And so just getting good with understanding like all the different types of claims or all the different types of issues that could appear based on what you have in your outline, and getting familiar with that and just getting better at finding issues is largely what the exams are going to test you on.
Great, thank you. Moving on to time, I think if I have three pieces of advice, my overarching pieces of advice for how to be successful, particularly as a 1L, the first one is do the reading all the time. The second one is create your outlines yourself as you go along. And the third one I would have is to treat your law school's studenthood as a full-time job. What do I mean by that? This has worked for me, and when I didn't do it, I did not do as well. When I treated my law school responsibilities as a full-time job, meaning clocking in at 8 and clocking out at 5, or 8 and 6, or 9 and 7, whatever works for you when your classes are. But if I, rather than what I did as an undergrad, which is, oh, I got to get to class now, and I'll go to class, and then I'm going to, play Frisbee for an hour, and then I'm going to go eat lunch, and then I might go to another class. Treating law school as though it's your job, when you do that, I think you can be quite successful. Meaning, okay, I have class now, I'm going to go to class, and then I'm going to spend the hour between that and my next class reading for the next class, maybe, or doing the outline from the class that just finished, those kinds of things. So my experience is really old. I want to have you listen to Michael and Brandt on this point. But in terms of time, you can talk about quantity if you like to, want to, about how much time you spend on any given week, and not an exam week when it's crazy, but like in a normal week, and how you kind of allocate your time, how you organize your time to make sure you're getting all your responsibilities done. Michael, let's start with you this time. What's your take on how to spend your time?
Sure. So, I mean, as far as time, Brandt touched on this earlier about like how much reading you're doing, but like to get everything done, you kind of have to treat it like a full-time job, because if you're not spending 40 hours on reading, like you probably won't get all your reading done. And so I definitely try to spend, like Professor Merriam said, I treat it like a job, and generally I quit working around like, I don't know, 7 or 8, depending on how much work I have to do, and take a break for lunch and things like that. But definitely on the weekdays, I'm spending pretty much all my time reading, or in the event that I have some writing to do and things like that. As far as allocating time, I think it helps to sort of get familiar with when you do your best work and trying to put like the most difficult work at that time. So like for me, it's a lot easier for me to read than to do writing. I think writing is a lot more like brain intensive. And so I'll try to do that in the morning when I feel a little bit fresher. And I think the same thing applies for like your reading. If there's a class that you really struggle with, I would probably try to take on that class when you feel most engaged rather than trying to get through like that toughest reading at like 9 o'clock at night. You're just not going to retain it as well. But I mean, I think Brandt talked a little bit about how many pages he read. I would agree. It's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of like 200, 250 pages a week. And the pages are what John Marshall thinks about tobacco contracts. And that's just tough stuff to get through. And so you really do need to dedicate like a full-time job, the majority of your at least weekday hours to getting through the readings.
Great. Brandt?
Yeah, I'll say it's a huge transition, at least it was for me coming from undergrad and then going to law school. My senior year of college, class itself was probably like number 5 or 6 on the list of things that I was doing, right? I mean, especially, and that depends on your major, right? I know, if you're in engineering, then you got to be a little more class focused, but I was in a college of business, which is sort of designed to let you do other stuff while you're there. So I was working my senior year, I was working 2 internships and a research job, and I was doing moot court. And then I would go to class, and the classes were sort of an afterthought at times, like certain weeks, right? And then 1L year, 1L is kind of designed so that you're not doing a whole lot else besides your classes. 1L, you can join orgs and stuff and get involved, but the majority of your time is going to be getting ready for class. And the other big transition from law school from undergrad to law school is, you treat it like a job, like Professor Merriam and like Michael said, but it's a job that has no deadlines. And so it takes a lot of discipline to actually sit down and go through a process for 6, 7, 8 hours a day, because your exam is 3 months in the future. That's sort of the only thing on your horizon that's like a concrete action item. And so you've got to figure out how to apply your time and I want to make sure I understand this concept. I want to make sure I understand up through this case in the case book by the end of today. And it takes a lot of sort of discipline and, foresight to know how much time you need to spend on stuff. And you need to set your own deadlines instead of having someone set them for you, which is a big difference between, a lot of jobs and also between law school and undergrad.
Great, thank you. And Brandt, you made a really important point that I'll put in my notes to remember for the future. That self-discipline, it's not just the self-discipline and I'm going to work right now instead of, I don't know why I said throw a Frisbee earlier. I don't think I threw a Frisbee one time in college, but whatever it is you want to do that's not work, it's that self-discipline of not having something. A lot of us are motivated, particularly people with type A personalities, particularly people attracted to law as a profession, are motivated externally, right? I'm going to do a great job. I don't want to disappoint that professor. I don't want to disappoint my boss. I'm going to turn in this thing. The brief's due tomorrow, so I'm going to have it done tomorrow, right? On time. But when that deadline is 3 months away, having the internal discipline to stick with it is a huge challenge. So you don't have to follow what Michael does or what Brandt does or what I did in terms of how you organize your time over the week, but you do have to have some kind of plan for here's how I'm going to get the work done, stretched out over the semester, so that I'm not pretending that I think I'm going to actually just catch up in the last week, because you're not. And the other people who have done it over the time are going to do better than you. That matters in law school, even if you're at a school that's not ultra competitive, because grades are what in large part dictate at most law schools dictate your job opportunities going forward, right? Whether or not you're going to have a job or the job that you want is going to rely on grades. And that is true at no greater time for that to be the case than in your 1L year. Your 1L year is going to kind of establish your transcript and your resume going forward for your job applications. If you're looking for a job 1L summer, if you're looking for a job 2L summer, that job application process, typically, we're going to talk about professional success in just one second, that job application process typically really ramps up at most schools in this fall semester of your second year of law school. Well, what do you have at that point to tell an employer about your legal skills? You've got your grades from the 1L year, and that's it. And so grades become super important. We've already talked about curving grades and the fact that the exam may be the only part of your grade. So we'll switch on now to that professional success. In the law, professional success comes from academic success initially, right? That doesn't necessarily true 20 years from now. But now, whether you get the job at Jones Day or whether you get that job at Wilkie Farr and Gallagher is going to come from your academic success. Part of that is what school you're going to, which comes from undergraduate, perhaps academic success. But a huge part of it is how are you actually doing in law school. And so you want the best jobs, you're going to have the best grades. And that's just kind of a harsh reality. And we have to remember that law school is a professional school, right? It is training you to do a profession. That is the goal. Not everybody goes on to be a practicing lawyer. Some people are there for the intellectual exercise. Some people become professors. Some people do. I had two of my closest friends in law school went on into business. They just wanted the understanding of the law before they went on and made their gazillions in business. So the point here, however, is because it's a professional school, you want to be acting like a professional from the beginning. You're establishing networks from the beginning. Some of the Michael's and Brandt's colleagues are going to be very important, maybe, and then too, very important people in the legal profession. I have colleagues from my time in law school who are right now sitting governors, who've been federal government cabinet secretaries. So if their memory of Merriam was he was an idiot or didn't care about anything back when we were in law school, that's all they know. Well, I can't call that person and say, hey, I need a favor, right? So you really are establishing your professional networks now. I mentioned the job hunt a moment ago, and I don't want to focus too much on that other than to say fall semester of your 1L year is not the time to be worried about what your job is going to be. There's going to be time to worry about your job after that. Fall semester of your 1L year is learning how to read cases, learning how to outline, and doing well on that first year exams. You're going to have loads of time later. And that includes like not worrying about what classes you're in or which professor you got assigned for constitutional law and so forth. Don't worry about the job yet, but be cognizant of the need to have professional relationships as you go forward. Professional relationships, again, need to be with your fellow students. They also need to be with your professors. When you need recommendation letters, you're going to want to get those recommendation letters for people who actually know who you are, right? They don't want somebody writing a recommendation letter for you who's just like, okay, well, I'll look through my notes. Oh, they got, an A- in my class. I'll write them a recommendation letter. That means you have to spend some time getting to know your professors, whether that's visiting them during office hours, whether that's interacting with them in some other way, their preferred way, and so forth. That's important. You're going to get your job ultimately based on your grades, some combination of your grades, the name of the law school on your diploma, and your connections. And so you want to be thinking about all those things. Once you're at a school, most of you who are headed to law school this fall have already picked what school you're going to. So that one's already set. Unless you decide to transfer, the name of the law school on your diploma is going to be what it is. So then what's left is your grades and your connections. And so you have to start thinking about that. You're not just a student when you're a law student, you're also a budding professional, and you need to carry yourself that way, interact with other people that way as well. I do want to be cognizant of time, but panelists, can you just comment briefly if you have anything to add to that about how you view yourself as a professional while still being a student and how that's manifested itself for you? Brandt, if you have anything.
Yeah, sure. I will say this is from my personal experience, and maybe it doesn't translate a whole lot to folks like you all who are planning to go straight through. I benefited greatly from working before law school, and that was huge for me in the interview process with firms, because I had done client work before, I had solved problems for people before, I had worked on a team before, and so that was a big asset to me in the interview process. And you don't need that, certainly, and people find other ways to interview well, certainly, but that was a big one for me. And so if you guys have opportunities now while you're sort of in school, or you take that summer between college and law school and try to do something meaningful that you'll be able to talk about later. A lot of the first year of law school especially is figuring out stuff to talk about when you're eventually looking for jobs, right? So you want to have some good stories to tell and some good, here's how I solved this problem, and that's the sort of thing I can bring to your firm or your organization, whatever it might be. So that's definitely big. And in terms of the job hunt, Professor Merriam's got it exactly right. Harvard actually has a rule: we can't have any contact with employers, and they can't have contact with us until December of 1L year. That Harvard really wants you focused on your classes until you can sort of make a hard transition from class mode to job hunt mode, which you kind of will remain in December through January, February. In some cases, people don't find jobs until March, and that's totally fine. It just depends on timelines for different industries and stuff. But yeah, that first set of grades is important. I mean, that the fall grades especially are the only ones you'll have to show employers when you're looking for that 1L summer job. And then that 2L summer job, we do our on-campus interviewing program in August before 2L year. So you've only got the 2 semesters worth of grades to show an employer who's thinking about hiring you, after law school, right? So those first year grades are important, and it's important to go all in on those during that first year.
Thanks. Michael, anything to add on professionalism?
Yeah, I agree with all that. I guess I have the other perspective in that I'm what people call a KJD, which is kindergarten to law school without any breaks. And so I don't think, I mean, I definitely think working does put you at an advantage. It helps out, but you can certainly compensate for that. And in terms of thinking about being a professional, I think in interviews and things like that, you want to show interest in the stuff you're learning and doing, which does not mean you have to love every class, but I do think firms appreciate it when you can kind of present yourself in a way where it's like, I really enjoy this area of the law. I would like to practice in this area. This is something that I see myself doing, because ultimately, in large part, the reason you're at law school is to get a job as a lawyer. And so thinking in that way, I think from the beginning is helpful. And then also representing yourself that way to employers as someone who is interested in at least some field of law is hopefully the place you find yourself in once you finish your first year.
Great, thank you. In the interest of time, I'm just going to kind of skip over lifestyle. We talked about it a little bit. Both Brandt and Michael indicated kind of how much they have to work and how they've structured their time. Feel free when we get to questions in just a second, attendees, you want to ask about their work-life balance. The point is, if you treat your law school studenthood as a full-time job, well, you have time for a life outside of your full-time job, if that's what you want. And not everybody does want a life outside of their full-time job, by the way, but if you want one, if you find yourself in Boston, you can go see the greatest baseball team in the world, in the Boston Red Sox, just down the street. But you can do other things, right? So, and I'll let people ask you questions about lifestyle in a moment. Now, panelists, before we do turn it over for questions, if I can ask each of you, if you had to kind of summarize, we talked about a lot of different things, and maybe the thing you want to talk about, we haven't talked about at all. If you had to summarize, remember back to your 6 months, 4 months away from entering law school, what's your biggest tip for being successful, particularly in that first year of law school? And Michael, let's start with you this time.
Sure. I think one of the biggest things I was confused about is just like, what am I supposed to be doing? Because you're reading a ton and you're getting called on in class, and then the exams are not really about what you were called on. And so just to emphasize, like in law school, the whole point of what you're supposed to be doing is figuring out like the rules or the propositions that these cases stand for. And so this is very different from undergrad in that there will never be a question on a law school exam that says like, what did the plaintiff argue in this case? Or like, what kind of writ was Marbury seeking in Marbury versus Madison? No one's going to ask you like the facts of the case. They're going to give you, like I said, a hypothetical and ask you to apply the principles or the things these cases stand for. And so you want to recognize while you're reading these cases that like you need to learn the facts for purposes of being called upon in class and talking about the cases. But the real thing you need to learn is what proposition of law does this case stand for? What is the test for this type of legal issue? And how can I apply it to a new set of facts? Because the whole thing you're tested on is applying the cases you already learned to something you have not yet learned that presents a similar factual issue. And so if you keep that in the back of your mind with every case you read, like what rule does this case set forward, or how might this same situation be presented on an exam? That's what I think you want to focus on as you're getting through your first year's reading.
And if I could add, I would imagine, Michael, be the primary makeup of what's in your outline, right? What are the rules or the propositions that were from all those cases? Yeah.
I mean, you have a test, and then I have a note. Oh, by the way, this case says if the plaintiff does this thing, then they can't recover. That's important to keep in mind. And so just those little notes of what is the test? Because that's what you're applying on your exam.
Very good. Thanks. Brandt, what about you?
Yeah, I'll go a slightly different route on this question. Actually, I think Michael has the academics covered really well. I'll say a quick note here about keeping yourself sane during 1L year. And so, and something important to remember, and especially, I mean, we had class on Zoom for my first year, which is a whole other set of challenges that I hope you guys don't ever have to face in law school. But people work hard, but they will convince you they're working way harder if you give them the chance to, right? I mean, and especially 1L year when everything feels competitive and you don't really know as Michael said, you don't know how to do the work and you're trying to kind of treading water a little bit, trying to figure it out. It's hard to be hearing from people, oh yeah, I was up all night reading for this class, or oh yeah, I spent the last 72 hours buried in my contracts casebook. And it can be kind of harmful to sort of buy into all of that. And it turns out when you actually sit people down and talk to them, you'll find out, like, oh, you are, caught up on those Netflix shows, and you've been making time for yourself. You just don't like to broadcast that to people. And so you got to remember that people like to sort of put on an image that they're working all the time, and you need to work a lot to be successful in law school, but you can still take time for yourself. And I had people, multiple people actually individually 1L year tell me, hey, I really appreciate how when someone asks you how your weekend was, you actually say, oh, it was great, I went golfing, or oh, it was great, I went whale watching, which, by the way, if you're ever in Boston, whale watching is great here. So I think you need to sort of not fall victim of the echo chamber of, people sort of getting into these sort of competitive little squabbles over who's working the hardest and people trying to make their lives sound the most miserable, right? It's important to take a little time for yourself and then be open with others about taking a little time for yourself, and it'll help people feel a lot better about where they're at. So that's a big tip that I took away from 1L.
That's super helpful advice. You're not going to be successful in law school if you don't make it to the end. And you're not going to make it to the end if you've driven yourself crazy by comparing yourself with others or holding yourself up to expectations that just aren't meetable. So thanks a lot for that perspective. By contrast, I went to a law school that's kind of well known or has a reputation anyway, as a beer and softball school. So everybody bragged about the opposite at my school. Everybody bragged about how they didn't do any work. And you knew that wasn't true either, because next morning in class, they were answering the questions perfectly well. But so you gotta have to kind of, no matter which school you're at, what school you're at, you kind of have to have a reasonable filter of what people are telling you. And that's very helpful advice. You didn't mention spending your time going to see the best team in baseball, but I'm sure you just somehow omitted that.
I've been a couple of times, actually. Not this season so far, although my constitutional law professor dressed in full Red Sox garb yesterday, or 2 days ago. They had an 11 o'clock first pitch, and so he scuttled out of class immediately, didn't take questions, and went straight down to Fenway. So
perfect. That's the annual Patriots Day game. That's wonderful. All right. So I'm going to turn off the screen share now, and just if you have a question for our panelists, if you could just raise your hand in Zoom, use that. We can answer some questions in our remaining time. Nicholas, I see your hand raised, so go ahead, please.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right, so, both of you have stated that, you go to great law schools, you guys are getting great jobs. Professor Merriam speaks very highly of you. I'm just curious on what your guys' grades look like in undergrad to get you to such a reputable school.
I think, I don't know, I don't have great knowledge on Brandt's grades, but I think he did pretty well. Yeah, I think as far as like application stuff like that, I'm sure you all are very familiar that it's a combination of grades and LSAT, and different schools care more or less about those things. And so I think I did fairly well in undergrad. I think I'm doing okay in law school. Like Brandt said, and like we've all said, the grading just happens differently. And so maybe that's one other thing we didn't mention, is that you should expect, if you've never gotten a B in your life, that may not be the case in law school. But yeah, I think I was all right in undergrad as well. Brandt, do you have anything to add to that?
We won't put anybody on actually telling us your grades.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch what you just said, Professor.
I'm saying we won't put anybody on the spot and actually ask you to tell us your grades. But Nicholas, I think you understand that, like, obviously they got good grades, right? They didn't get into the schools they're going to with 2.2 grade point averages. And I think we'll just leave it at that. Kia, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So I'm actually going to law school in September, I think. I just got into UPenn, and I think, thank you. And so I think they do the same thing as Brandt, where we're not allowed to disclose our GPA. How do you guys work around that? Since you can't really show your grades for it.
Do you mean to employers or to other students?
Right. So for whenever we're like on a resume, I checked out their page and it says we're not allowed to disclose our rank or our GPA whenever we're applying for jobs with firms.
Yeah, I don't. They actually do that. The school makes that rule. The firms don't make that rule, and so
Right.
That's an interesting one. So I know. So we had to send transcripts to firms. They could see our transcripts. They could see individual class performances, but they have no idea. If the people looking at your transcript aren't familiar with the Harvard grading system, they don't even know what H and P and DS mean, right? And nobody should unless they went to. And I imagine Penn has a similar grading system that sort of lumps large bands of percentiles together. I would you use the term "get around it." I actually would say embrace it, and the reason the schools do that is they want you to be able to focus on other aspects of why you'd be valuable to that firm outside of your grades. And I would take them up on that opportunity, right? I would find things about yourself that you want to make sure you express to firms that aren't grades. They'll see your grades, they'll make a judgment whether they like your grades or don't like your grades. But when you're in the interview process and when you're in the application process, you want to be sort of focusing on other ways that you're going to be valuable to that employer. And so I would say, yeah, let the transcript be the transcript, and let it do its own talking. And then when you're doing your own talking, talk about something else. That's my advice.
Cool. Thank you.
Great. Nick, you want to go again? Was your hand not ready?
Yeah, sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. First off, I want to apologize. I didn't know it was coveted information asking about GPAs. That's on me. Besides that, I've spoken to Professor Merriam a few times about certain minors that you guys would recommend. I think one of you said you majored in economics, minor in legal studies. Now I know law school doesn't particularly look at minors or majors as deeply as in actual GPAs and LSAT scores, but what would you guys think would prepare you best for the type of work you're going to be doing in law school?
I would say the most common is probably political science, pretty far and away, I think is the predominant one. I don't know that course, that field of study necessarily gives you an advantage. And I would just comment generally that a lot of the people in law school have very diverse majors and backgrounds. Like my girlfriend is in law school. She majored in English education to be a teacher, and she's doing exceptional in law school, but obviously none of her coursework in undergrad related to the stuff we're learning now. I have heard generally that people who like major in English, who are strong writers already, tend to be, I guess, more successful than not on average because they have some writing experience. But I mean, I don't know if it's true that the English coursework prepares you for law school as much as people who major in English are already pretty strong writers. And so I would say generally, I don't think there's like a superior major that will give you some sort of tremendous advantage over your classmates. I think you can go to law school with anything. I have classmates who have biomedical science degrees who are also doing very well. And so I think, I mean, if there's a field of study you're interested in undergrad, I would probably prioritize that rather than trying to find like a particular major or minor that's going to give you a leg up, with the minor caveat that because political science is really common, maybe something unique might give you a slight advantage in that, like, oh, that's odd, we don't have many, I don't know, philosophy majors. But other than that, I don't know if it has that much of a role.
Yeah, I'll add on to that just a brief note. I think Michael did a great job. I would caution against trying to over curate a resume for law school while you're an undergrad. Like Michael said, he hit the nail on the head. Do something that interests you in undergrad. And if you're you guys are all probably upperclassmen, if I'm understanding right. So I'm sure your majors and things are already decided, but there aren't a lot of undergrad classes that will prepare you for the actual substance of law school. I think moot court is the one exception that at least that I had in law school. I think, reading cases and being able to form an argument is key to what you do in law school, and so that's great preparation. But I took a class with Professor Merriam at UCF, and it doesn't look a whole lot of anything like what a law school class looks like. And so you can't try to, prep for law school too much through the classes that you take in undergrad. So do what interests you, have something interesting to talk about later when you're applying for jobs and when you're applying to law schools. And there's no real right answer that you need to sort of hit these certain resume points when you're applying to law school. It doesn't need to be a certain major, but it doesn't need to be a certain set of classes. So yeah, do what you think is interesting for sure.
Great answers. Thank you. Other questions for our panelists before we wrap up? Got some experts here. Kia, back to you. Go ahead. You're muted. There you go.
Okay. Last question. I don't want to take up your time, but what are your thoughts on outlines from 2Ls? So incoming 1Ls getting the outlines from people that already took that professor kind of already. If you have any experiences or if you know any people that did that.
Yeah, it's super common. I know I've never actually gotten an outline directly from somebody, but there are online exchanges where people just post them, and professors encourage it. They say, you know, go look at past outlines, sure, but I would caution against over relying on a pre-made outline, right? As Professor Merriam touched on this earlier, making your own outline is how you study. You learn the material by going back over it and distilling it down into, you know, key holdings, key takeaways. And so there's sort of this, if you get a pre-made outline that's made for you and you sort of think that makes you ready for the exam, you haven't done the actual work to get ready for the exam. And so I love using past outlines as sort of a reference to make sure I didn't miss anything when I'm making my own, but they're valuable in that sense, but they're not a replacement for making your own. I wouldn't say.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And that's what I do with outlines as well, is I'll find one on, there's like an outline bank, and I'll say, all right, let's make sure I didn't miss any key points. The other thing to keep in mind is that the professors might vary what is covered each year, not by a lot, but it's possible that, you know, you covered a concept this year that was not, they didn't have time for last year. And so that's another thing to keep in mind, is that the content might vary, or a new case might come out, which can also substantially change things. And so that's another thing to keep in mind.
That's a great question, Kia, and thanks for those responses. I would echo the same thing. Use it as a reference, use it as a what did I miss? But if you use it to start with, if you start your outline based on somebody else's, you're going to skip the hard part and the important part of law school. Any final questions before we go? I don't see any. Brandt, Michael, thank you so much for spending your time. Those of you who are headed to law school this fall will appreciate much more when you are in exam week or about to be in exam week, how kind of and generous it was of Michael and Brandt to join us for an hour plus right now. So thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your experiences with some fellow Knights. We really appreciate it.